Hi, I'm Mark and this is Foothill Paint Fabrication. Today we're going to be working on the 1950 Chevy 3100 pickup front fenders. There's a lot of rust right where the fenders meet the cab. It's a very tight area. The tires throw up a lot of mud and road grime back in here. It gets packed back in this area and never comes out unless you crawl up in there and pressure wash it out. So the flange that holds the fender to the cab is rusted out in multiple places, completely gone in this area, and then there's some pretty heavy pitting and a big hole over here. So both fenders have some damage. This is the worst one, so we're going to be cutting off this flange completely and making a new piece. It's not worth trying to patch these holes. It's easier for me to actually just remove the whole thing, cut out a new piece, and then put it in place. The other one is not so bad, so we're probably just going to patch a few holes on that one and get it back up. It looks pretty good compared to this one. It's a lot better. So today we're going to be drilling out spot welds and then making a pattern and then cutting out a new piece and then flanging it so it'll fit on here properly and then plug welding it back in. So let's go ahead and get to it. First off, I'd like to talk about holding parts when you're working on them. My door fender rack is full with the rear fenders, but they wouldn't work anyways because I would end up bolting to this flange to hold them up. And it will eventually end up on that rack. But to do this kind of work, you have to have it secure. And you have to be able to handle it where it's not flopping around, you're going to drop it or whatever. And it's working it up on a table or a bench is way better than down on the ground. It'll just wear you out doing that. So what I have here is just kind of this rolling kind of a rack. My neighbor actually gave me this when he moved away. And I just threw a piece of plywood on here. And what I've got is a 2x4 over here, which is a squeeze clamp, kind of holding it down on the flat. And they're not super tight. They're not distorting the sheet metal. And I don't have a clamp that'll reach this far, so basically I just laid a 2x4 down inside the fender on the flat area, laid another 2x4 at an angle, and then just cranked down on a C-clamp right here. It's given some pressure, but not a lot, but it's enough to keep it from, sliding away from me, and then if I need to do something else, we'll worry about that then. So let's look at the damage we have here. Okay, as you can see, we've got a hole right here, completely rusted out. The fender rolls over here, but it comes to a very small one. It goes into this flange right here. It's been notched down or flanged down. And then we come over here. Here's another hole where it just rusted through, where the road grime and everything got between the cab and the sheet metal and just sat there and ate. And then over here we got some heavy pitting, which isn't that big of a concern. None of this is visible. And then of course we have where the piece is completely missing. I've already gone and removed this piece. And then what we're going to do is these spot welds are this one's not bad, that one's not bad, but this one here, very close to the edge of the exterior panel. This one's the same way, this one's the same way, and then we have one more up here. So I'm going to carefully drill these out and try to stay away from this lip right here. And then hopefully we can get this removed. And then I've got a scrap piece of sheet metal actually off of this truck. The front of the bed where it sits up against the cab was rusted out down low, so the owner went ahead and bought a reproduction piece. So I have that piece here. I'm going to use that for the steel to go ahead and cut this out on. So we're going to go ahead and start drilling these spot welds out and see if we can get this separated off the fender. And then we're going to go ahead and see if we can make a pattern. All right, for spot welds, I would normally use my spot weld cutter, which I may on a few of these. You can see it's a pretty good diameter there. Let me get it down in where you can see it. So you can see the teeth on it. I showed in the other video how to use it. This end is spring loaded. So you center punch or put a little drill in the center. Then that sits on it, and then you just put it in the drill and just push down, and it cuts like a hole saw all the way around. But it's a little big. So if I try to use those close to the edge over here, some of the spot welds are very close to the edge, I'm going to end up chewing off part of that. So I'm going to, might use a little bit of both. So I'm thinking I will use the unibit. It's got a fat little face on here, and it's just about the right diameter for these spot welds. These spot welds aren't that big in diameter. So I'm thinking I'm going to be able to go ahead and just drill those out a little bit, and then maybe have to switch up to a little bit bigger bit just to get that. Lock it a little bit. If you look carefully while you're doing it, you'll start to see a little rust line or a line where this sheet metal and the spot weld and the other sheet metal are meeting. And so what you can do is kind of steer the drill bit a little bit. If you've cut all the way on this side, then you can actually just push it back over to the other side a little bit. All right, let's grab the hammer, the chisel. All right, like I showed before, I just use an old wood chisel. It's kind of sharp, and then try to split this. There are tools for splitting seams. This is my tool. All right, so we got that one. Let's see about this one. Just like that. Okay, we got them all drilled out and the flange off. I went ahead and through drilled the last 4 here because I figured out about how big that spot weld was inside there, and I picked a drill bit out and tried to hit the center, and then hit it with the unibit, and then a couple of shots with the chisel. Let's see if I can get that in there. And they all popped out. And then next we're going to make this piece. So it's pretty bad. Obviously it's missing large chunks. So let's figure out how we're going to make the pattern, and we'll go from there. Okay, back to my trusty file folders for patterns. So we're going to lay it out so it covers up as much as possible, and hold it nice and flat. We're just going to trace around it with a Sharpie, trying to stay right up against it. There's little notches sticking out in 3 spots here. I'm thinking those are for when it was pushed up into the fender. That was to keep them from pushing it too tight up against the actual fender itself. There's one down at this end too, a little rusted out. So here's a hole. This is actually goes all the way through the fender. I'm going to use this hole as a alignment, so when I line the next piece, the overlapping piece on it, and tape it together. So we're going to be able to cut this out right here, and then lay that out on some sheet metal once we get this other piece fit. So let me cut this, then we're going to make a strip of what I think it's supposed to look like. I've got the other fender that's in one piece, and this part isn't missing, so we may be able to lay some file folder up in there and draw around it, and then match these 2 pieces together. So what we're going to do is we're going to get this up inside here all the way to the corner, and I want to make sure I use this hole right here. That's going to be my reference to line this up with the other piece, and this is where it actually bolts on the cab. So I make sure I get everything lined up properly and in the right configuration. Once we get this all marked, cut out, and taped together, we're going to take it over to the fender and then see how it fits. All right, I got some clamps and some magnets. So I've got it pulled all the way up in this corner, so I know that reference is good. We'll go ahead and clamp this, just like that. We'll get a magnet, and we'll stick it right here. So I've got it up against there pretty nicely, and it's up. We're going to push this. It's a little loose right here, so I'm going to push this around, pull it tight. So that feels pretty good. So now we're just going to draw this shape. And I'll always try to cut right on the line since it's a fat Sharpie, right? So, and then I'm going to draw this hole, and that's going to help us line up on the other piece we've already drawn out and cut out. Just going to pop this off, cut it, see how it fits. Okay, so now that fits up in there really nice. So that looks pretty good. Now we're going to mate these two pieces together. I'm thinking about possibly holding it up inside and then taping it from underneath to make sure I've got it exactly right. All right, well, we got this piece laid out on here and it looks good. The hole's lined up. I didn't have a punch for a 1/2 inch hole. Tried to make one out of a piece of copper tubing, but it's ID 1/2 inch. And it's too soft, so when I drove it down on a sample piece, it was just mangled it. So just use a razor blade, try to cut the circles as perfect as I could. So this piece is looking really good on here. This hole and this hole are the same hole, so if we line these up and we lay them on here, they don't line up. This hole is pushed a little too far, and that's because of the thickness of the sheet metal. Because if I lay it up underneath, it matches perfectly. See, so you have to be aware when you're laying this stuff out that, you know, the radius and the thickness of the material, as you go through that radius, even 20 gauge, it will throw off the dimension quite a bit. So you need to be mindful of that. So I'll be measuring from the edge of this one to the edge of that one, and I'll make sure that when I put this together, the edge of this one to the edge over here matches the same. Now the bolts aren't 1/2 inch bolts, so obviously they're body bolts, so there's plenty of room to wiggle it around and to get them on there. So, and the body bolts will have bigger fenders on the fender washers on the back side. So we're going to go ahead and get this lined up. And since we're on the top, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this hole line up, and it lines up here, and I'm going to tape it together. And then we're going to figure out where this hole is supposed to be. These holes are perfect. This one's landing on there, so I'm thinking I'm going to reach around the back side and trim that hole out a little bit. So let's get this tape together. Some masking tape. And what I'll do is I'll be really careful when I lift this up so I can tape it on the back side so it doesn't shift like this. And of course, we're going to fine tune it and make sure it's all correct before we use this as a pattern. All right, so those are stuck together. And they have overlap, you know, several inches, so it's not going to twist and come out of alignment. I still have a little tab to make on the end to match this. So I'm just going to measure that out. I'll tape a piece on there that I can make, and then I'll also have the bend line on it too, because that goes all the way up in there and bends. And like I said, there's 3 pieces of sheet metal that come together. This piece, this bracket underneath, and then the fender itself. I feel pretty good about this one. I'm going to get this little piece off camera, fine tune that hole, make sure it's all good to go. And then we've got our piece to cut out of sheet metal. So over here, you can clearly see now the pieces that are missing. So this is rusted back. Not bad, you know, here, but it's pretty pitted right here. So I'm thinking it's pretty bad here too. So I'm thinking I'm going to come back, cut this out, and make a piece from here to there. I don't want to come up in here if I don't have to. So I'll probably cut back here, cut an 1/8 or as far as I can away from the edge of the roll of the fender. It's got a little dip there. I'll have to check the other fender, make sure it doesn't belong there. And then I'll put a piece in here, weld that, get that all ground out smooth, and then this piece can go on. And then back over here, we're going to have to cut a piece as well. this should go straight across here. There's a little part sticking out there, and there was just a straight line across there. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this along here, try to avoid the hole, and then come back almost like a 90-degree little patch right there, and we'll cut that angle into it. Then we'll weld that in and get that nice and clean. Same time we do this one, and then it'll be ready to start fitting the flange on there. Okay, we're going to go ahead and cut this rusted section out here, and then move over and cut the other one out. So I'm just going to use the angle grinder on this with a little thin cutoff blade, and hopefully we can get a nice straight line here to make making the patch a lot easier. Okay, wasn't much left of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to end up using the leftover piece from the patch panel from the rear fenders, and I bent it to match this curve already. I'm just going to lay it in there, and then we're going to figure out the distance as it sits. We're going to sweeten up this line here a little bit, get it a little flatter, so we get a nice tight seam. And then we're going to go ahead and cut that to fit, and we'll grind all this down, get bare metal, and then get that welded in. All right, we got the piece fit in there pretty good. I've got it butted tight here, but it's laying underneath a portion of this here. Since this line isn't perfectly straight, what I want to do is take an awl and scratch it in here. Then cut that to fit. It's about 0 right here. And what I'll probably do I don't know if you can see, but I know you probably can't see, but it goes from 0 up to here, probably an 1/8. It's probably 3/16 there. So I'm going to grind that back. I'm not going to try to cut it. And then once we get it fit up on there real nice, then I can cut it to length. Because right now, if I cut it now to length, it will be too long when it finally comes up here. So I'm going to get this fit up in there nice, get it up in there tight, so most of it's laying out here, and then scribe where it needs to be cut off. And then once we get that set inside there, then I'll go from this point to that point with the same thickness, I don't know what that is, 5/8 maybe, and I'll just scribe a parallel line, and then we'll cut that, and we'll have that piece. The other piece, super simple, just a triangle, so I'll just lay a piece of flat 20 gauge up underneath there, scribe through it, and then cut it to fit, and then just put that one in there. So let me go ahead and get this cut so it fits, and then I'll bring you back, and then we'll get that line laid out, and we'll see where we'll end up. All right, now we have it cut to length, and I've got this line done. I need to pull it down a little bit, but that's a pretty tight seam right there. It's really what you want when you're doing butt welding on patches. If you flange them and overlap them, you obviously have a lot more wiggle room, and you want a little V to put your welds down into. But for butt welding, you want that as tight as possible. Makes your life a lot easier when you're welding it, so you don't burn through. And then you get good penetration. And then when you grind that weld smooth, you're not grinding away any strength. So I've got a little hole up here where there was a rust spot and a spot weld, and it's a little little pitted right here, so it's going to be interesting. I'm going to try to back that up with a piece of copper. I think I got maybe an old copper pipe or something. I'll hammer flat and then clamp up in there to help pull the heat away when I'm welding. But other than that, so all we have to do is mark this to width, super simple, and then just cut that to fit and we're good to go. All right, we're ready to start welding these patches on or tacking them in and then welding them. I broke down and bought a brand new helmet. Got a Lincoln 3350. My old helmet was 20 years old, 22 years old. So I went ahead and picked up the 3350 series. Auto darkening, shade control, there's tons of YouTube videos on them. It's a pretty nice helmet. The band is really comfortable. So we're gonna give a shot on this thing so I can adjust it up. The old one was so scratched up I had changed the lenses out of it, and I figured, you know, it's time for an upgrade. I was having trouble seeing. My friends will be making fun of me. But even with my glasses on underneath the helmet, I was still having trouble seeing what I was doing. So, and I plan on buying a TIG welder. In the old helmet, the shade wasn't adjustable. So it'd be no good for TIG welding. So I figured I'd pick it up anyways. It's a nice helmet, nice bag to keep it in the drawer when I'm not using it so the lens doesn't get scratched up. So let's get this thing tacked together, and then we'll get them both tacked, and then we'll get them welded, ground smooth, and we can get that other piece on here. I'm going to get this dollied a little bit right here. So it's flat. It's going to weld it. All right, that's all tacked on. We'll get the other one clamped up, tacked on, and we're good to go. This helmet is like night and day. It's like not wearing a helmet when the shade's not on. It's really remarkable. It's more of a blue than a green, and it's really, really clear, really clear. Let's get this other one clamped up all the way and get it tacked. Okay, that's it. We got them tacked in place. I had to turn the welder down. I had it set for 20 gauge. I had to lower it down a little bit because the Fender material is kind of suspect in a few spots, and it poked through right there, even though the seam was really tight. So I'm going to go ahead and get a little piece of sheet metal on backing these joints and over weld onto it like I showed you on the rear fenders. And I'll do the same thing here, and then we'll get it filled in and then get it ground smooth. And it'll be ready for the other piece. So let me clean this up with a wire brush and then or wire wheel, and then we'll get this tacked together off camera, and then we'll get it ground smooth and we'll bring you back. Okay, bring you in close. I got this little triangle piece in. Came out really good. Then over here, this one came out pretty good as well. Pretty happy. It was a little sketchy right down through here. That rust was pretty pitted. I was welding very, very thin material, but I didn't want to come out too close to the edge of the body line. So I was able to get that welded, so I know it's thick enough. So all we have to do is make the bracket. This one here, I probably should have took the piece out a little bit farther. I was chasing some thin stuff. I had a little hole, fill the hole, hole, fill the hole, popped another hole. So I finally hit some good meat there. Actually grounded underneath, so it's nice and flat underneath, so when the flange goes on there. We got some cleanup to do underneath here still, where the spot welds were, and stuff like that. And now we just have to make the flange that holds the whole thing onto the cab. So that's the next step. We already have the pattern made. I still haven't run over to my buddies to cut it out with a plasma cutter. It's a little hot out here today. I think it's cooler in the shop, but it's pretty hot outside. So I'll probably just prep it and do it first thing in the morning, but and then we can get that flanged and then get that tacked on there, and we'll be pretty good on this fender. Okay, we're going to stop right there. We got a lot of work done, so we're going to finish this up on part 2. Get the flange piece cut out and flanged, and then weld it back on and get these things a little bit closer to paint. Thanks for joining me here at Foothill Paint Fabrication. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, and hit that bell icon so you get notifications when I release a new video.